Emerson College.
Tonight on Talking Politics, the Mass Teachers Association and a group of state lawmakers are pushing to make it legal for teachers in the state to go on strike. But is that a right they should have? We'll dig into the pros and cons ahead. But first, coming off her first ever State of the City speech, it has been an especially newsy stretch for Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. A few days ago, in an interview with Spark FM, she re-upped her call for more state help addressing the homelessness and addiction crises that have converged for years in the neighborhood known as MCAS. Specifically, Wu said the state should work to roll out the sort of temporary housing Boston's been using to try to alleviate those problems in other parts of Massachusetts.
I'm going to continue renewing our call. We need the state to help on this front.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People are coming in from all across the state and even beyond. And the right thing to do, the effective thing to do, we see it works, is to have this system that we've set up in Boston, set up in other parts of the state as well.
Whether Maura Healey, the governor, will heed Wu's call is an open question and could tell us more about their evolving relationship. For good measure, Wu also announced her picks for Boston's reparations task force, which has a huge job to do and not a ton of time in which to do it. Throw in some big pending changes to the city's budgeting process and the makeup of the Boston School Committee, and there is a lot to unpack. Joining me to discuss it are GBH News City Hall reporter Soraya Wintersmith and Sean Philip Cotter, who covers that same beat for the Boston Herald. Thank you both for being here. Soraya, what stands out about Mayor Wu's picks for the reparations task force, either individually or collectively?
I think the things that stick out to me as most interesting with the task force are that it's pretty diverse in terms of work experience and age, and then there's the issue of pay sort of looming around it. In terms of the makeup, this is not what many people may have expected, a panel of experts or historians or researchers. You've got two high school students, juniors at the Burke. You've got a man who's been practicing law in Massachusetts since the 1970s, an artist, a nonprofit leader, a college student, very diverse, again, in terms of age and work experience. And then with the issue of pay, the mayor has said that they will receive a stipend as the law that made the task force allows. It's interesting, not just as they start their work examining a legacy of unpaid labor, but the issue of pay in the city. It's a theme now that we pay people for their brain work and their time working on city task force.
And is that in part because there used to be this idea that, well, you know, you should be flattered if you have a chance to be on a city task force. Right, so like, give us your time and give it to us for free, and that mindset's going out the window, which strikes me as a good thing. All right, what are the big questions that the task force is going to have to answer, or try to answer, in what, about a year and a half?
They have until June 2024 to produce a report, and the questions that they need to answer in the lead up to that report are: what was Boston's role and sort of connection to the slave trade, and what impacts did that leave here? What has Boston done since that time to sort of make up for any of the impacts that they identify? And then what more does Boston need to do in order to address whatever they find and document? I should add that the chair this week made it clear that in his view, it's not a matter of whether, it is a matter of when. So I would add that question, when, just based on Chair Feaster's remarks.
Sean Philip Cotter, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, the mayor came out and did something that she did under Governor Baker. Then Governor Baker said that the state needs to help more when it comes to responding to the problems at MCAS and the way that they're taking shape elsewhere in the state. My recollection from watching the State of the City speech she gave fairly recently is that she put a pretty upbeat spin on how things were going at MCAS. I actually remember in the middle of the speech thinking, oh, that's noteworthy that she's saying, you know, giving a glass half full take. Were you surprised to see her come out and say, hey, the state has to help us out more than they are?
I was not particularly surprised about that, Adam. I think this is a long-standing contention of public officials in the city of Boston going back for as long as the MCAS area has been at issue, that this is actually one of the few things that politicians here agree about in the city of Boston, is that everybody else needs to do more. To some extent, they have a point in that Boston and a lot of the people who are at MCAS do come from other parts of the state, and so the folks here say there need to be more services spread out. On the other hand, this is the hub, as they like to say, so, I mean, big city is where things are going to be.
Yeah, for better or worse. So the last time Mayor Wu did this, Governor Baker and his administration, as I recall, got a little touchy and said, let's remind you, Mayor Wu, and everyone else of all the things that we're already doing to try to help out, and here's some suggestions for things you might want to do differently. How did Governor Healey respond, and how did her response compare with the Baker administration's response? Or have we gotten one even yet?
Well, I think from the mayor's side, this is a bit of a positioning thing. Like, she's just trying to set this out now as I think a lot of people are trying to sort of fire their opening salvos in negotiations, for lack of a better way of putting it, with the Healey administration to sort of get in first before the administration can take a position, and then hopefully the Wu administration would look to get more.
That makes sense. All right, let's move on to this participatory budgeting issue, which I know both of you covered. Not a phrase that maybe is getting our viewers' hearts beating faster as I utter it now, but I was struck at reading your reports, I wasn't there, how contentious the city council hearing involving this issue seemed to be. I heard some sound, I think, that you got, Soraya, from Frank Baker. I woke up to it in the morning, and he sounded like he was pretty hot, as he sometimes gets. What was it about this topic that made a bunch of people on the council and also outside the council kind of grumpy or irritable or passionate? And yeah, feel free, you can start us out here, and then if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think by city council standards over the past year, this was like basically kumbaya. I mean,
okay, my bad. In that case.
Well, but no, I mean, in reality, different councilors have genuinely different views on some of these issues, and so they disagree on a few of the main points, which are the size of the board and whether they should be paid. And so
again, the pay issue.
Yeah, exactly. and a lot of them cited, for example, the reparations task force, as well as some other boards that the members do get paid. But in this one, there was some disagreement. It was more, the reason why this ended up being particularly noteworthy is that through like an odd twist of fate, 3 councilors were all absent, which is pretty unusual. And so even though the changes that the sort of more leftward councilors wanted did get a majority of the councilors who were there, it was not a majority of the whole body. So that didn't pass. So that, I guess, probably sets up future discussions.
Okay, but tell me if I'm getting this right. And we should probably remind viewers, and you guys can tell me if I have the details here wrong. This is a new approach to budgeting. Comes out of a ballot question that was passed with the leadership of then Boston City Councilor Lydia Edwards, who's now a state senator. And the idea essentially is we're going to give the people in the city more of a say when it comes to where we're spending money, right? Where we're spending money we get from them and that we spend on their behalf. Soraya, when you and I were talking about this, there were some advocates who thought that Mayor Wu's approach to this new approach to budgeting, her framework for it, that it didn't go far enough, right, in terms of bringing in the public. Is that a fair
That is right.
characterization? Okay. So what, if anything, does this fight? You've got councilors like Frank Baker, who I think take umbrage at the very idea that other people are going to be a part of this process, as opposed to members of the Boston City Council. You've got advocates on the other side saying, hey, wait a minute, there should be more members of the city of Boston, citizens, ordinary people who are brought into this. What does that all tell us about the political balance that Mayor Wu is trying to strike, not just on this issue, but as she runs the city generally?
This is another instance where some of the folks that probably were closely aligned with her on the campaign trail find themselves not getting all of the things that they want. And clearly she recognizes that she cannot give that progressive base all of the aspects of policy making that they demand. I think just like the police budget that we saw with the budget process last year, just like the rent control proposal, which very further left-leaning advocates do not like, just like with school committee, she finds herself being a person that was previously on the outside of power, advocating, pushing for more leftward policy. Now she's on the inside having to respond to people who are even more left-leaning than she is. she cannot give them everything that they want every time.
You anticipated where I was hoping to go next, which is the school committee issue, which strikes me as having the potential to, you said it was kumbaya and participatory budgeting. You caught me in my hyperbole. It seems to me like the school committee issue may get really hot. They're taking that up next week, right? The Boston City Council. After Mayor Wu was elected back in 2021, I talked with Ricardo Arroyo and Julia Mejia, who had led the push for a shift to an elected school committee. They overwhelmingly passed a non-binding budget question. I think we have a little bit of video of Julia Mejia talking about why it was time to finally do this.
Boston is the only municipality in the entire Commonwealth that does not have an elected school board. And it is due time for us to really give people back the power. This is a matter of voter suppression. And that we have to see this issue not just around education, but this is civil rights. And I think that now is the time in this moment for the legislators to recognize that Boston is old enough and grown up enough to be able to handle our own business.
Let me ask you how the school committee debate next week is likely to play out. What are the options that are going to be discussed in terms of making the school committee different than the appointed body it is now? And how are things likely to unfold?
I will just say it is a capital bag of question marks.
Yeah, I mean, I know that, like, Ricardo Arroyo has told me that he wants to move sooner rather than later on this. Like, they're sort of in the midst of this sprint of legislation, it seems like, after... I mean, last year they were somewhere between distracted and moribund on the productivity scale. But so they really are trying to go through with some of those big picture things. And I know this is something that folks on the left in particularly really want. But I mean, to be clear, non-binding ballot question in 2021 about the school committee did get about 80% support. So this isn't like just a fringe issue or anything like that.
And yet the council can't seem to get it together. I said in our politics newsletter last week or a couple weeks ago that when we observed a sort of technical hearing where they were talking about language, there were questions about whether or not there should be a student at all. There were questions about whether or not the student should have a vote. There were questions about whether or not there should be multiple students on the body. Further than that, we do not know whether all of the councilors support a fully elected school committee. Some have indicated they're willing to negotiate with the mayor and give her some appointments
Which
so that her
she says
power
she
remains.
wants, right? She doesn't want it to just be...
That's the other
right.
thing, Adam, is that the latest thing that she said is that I don't think it's time to actually work on the issue of school committee. And so
Oh,
even
to work on
if,
it at all.
Right. So even if there's a proposal that does come to the floor, which we haven't seen yet and we may see next week, even if it does garner a majority and make it to the mayor, we don't know that she will sign it or reject it or even be willing to negotiate on it.
So, and yet another example there, tell me if I'm reading this right, of the dynamic that you talked about. She used to be on the outside advocating great big systemic and structural changes like getting rid of the BPDA. Now she is, in some ways, a conservator of the status quo.
Now she's power.
She's moving this. All right, Soraya Wintersmith, Sean Philip Cotter, thank you both.
Thank you very
Happy
much.
to do it.
Next up, should teachers in Massachusetts have the legal right to strike? It's a question that's become pressing recently for two distinct reasons. First off, in the last few months, teachers around the state have already been going on strike, even though the law currently bars them from doing so. Most recently in Woburn, where classes were canceled for a week as a result. There, the striking teachers seem to enjoy some significant public support, and in the end, they won a new contract with some key concessions involving pay raises and a reduction in some class sizes. In addition, legislation that would make strikes like that legal instead of illegal is currently under consideration on Beacon Hill. But there are some big stumbling blocks, starting with the corner office. In a recent interview with WBZ's John Keller, Governor Maura Healey said even though her parents were educators, she's not a fan of the idea.
Every day when I see kids out of school because of a strike, you know, my heart just breaks because kids have been through enough in terms of learning loss and the like. And so, you know, my strong encouragement has been to resolve this labor matter. Let's get the kids back in school. Let's give them what they need and find ways, of course, to support our educators and our schools.
So what are the best arguments for changing the law, or conversely, keeping it the way it is? And what might the governor's discomfort with teacher strikes tell us about how she'll approach education issues generally? Joining me to discuss those questions are Deb McCarthy, the vice president of the Mass Teachers Association, which supports legalizing teacher strikes, and Glenn Koocher, the executive director of the Mass Association of School Committees, which is against legalization. Thank you both for being here. Deb, let me start with you. Why, in principle, does the MTA believe teachers should have the legal right to strike?
Because we believe that if the legislation passes, kids will be in school. That currently the system is broken, and that we are being denied the opportunity to bargain in good faith at the table with members of the school committee, because the system does not allow for the give and take at the bargaining table, but rather we have lawyers and mediators who have taken over. It's been delayed, and we are unable to get the business done at the bargaining table.
I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So you're saying that if the legislation were to pass and teachers had the legal right to do this, that it would actually result in fewer disruptions
Yes,
to
and that's
in-class
actually
learning?
what the research shows in the states that have that right, that because the legislation requires that you have 6 months to get the deal done, and that you're at the table and you're bargaining in good faith, rather than districts who are without a contract for over a year, and there's no consequences for the management side to show up at the table.
Okay, so a catalyst for deal making, among other things.
Yeah.
Glenn, I know you have a very different take. Why do you think that teachers should not have this legal right?
The current law already provides the other side of the table, labor side, with an arsenal of tactics and rights to protect what they need to do their jobs at the bargaining table. There's collective bargaining in general, which is a very strong pro-labor statute. It's been in effect since 1972 or 1973. It's worked very effectively. It provides the definitions and requirements for good faith bargaining. It talks about mediation. It talks about fact finding, all the different steps that allow for a really thorough process of good faith bargaining. And it's largely worked effectively in Massachusetts for over 50 years. You don't need to go the next step. The current steps are more than adequate to protect people's rights.
I don't want to gin up gratuitous conflict here, but I do want to give, if you want to, each of you a chance to respond to the other. As you hear the points that Glenn makes, is there anything that you think he is missing? And I'll give you a similar chance to address what Deb's points are.
You know, Glenn and I had the opportunity to talk beforehand. I was a local president for many years. And in the beginning...
25-year classroom teacher,
25
right?
years
Fifth grade
in the town of Hull, and bargained many contracts. And many years ago, we had the opportunity with the members of the school committee to bargain. I can remember one of the first contracts where over the weekend for like 12 hours, myself and the chair of the school committee, and we sat at the table and got the deal done. It was an arduous process, but it was a process at the community level. And we were able to get the contract that brought the working conditions, which are the students' learning conditions, that the community deserved. And we don't find that anymore. It's not happening at the community level with the school committee members.
But the law allows all of that stuff to continue to happen. The fact that contracts don't get negotiated as quickly in 2022 or 2023 as they did before has more to do with bargaining tactics and the level of passion that might have been brought to the table. Sometimes it's not in everybody's interest to settle quickly. Sometimes it is, but usually, particularly with the school committee side, people want these contracts settled. And that's why bargaining takes place in good faith, which means everybody's at the table, everything gets discussed, everything is discussed for a reasonable period of time. And negotiations usually start in October. That's when you give the notice that you want to bargain for the next contract, which means 6 months later is March or April. So under the proposed legislation, there's no problem getting to the 6-month period after which you'll be able to strike if the law were to pass. And there's not a labor lawyer in the state who's fooled by that provision.
I saw you opening your mouth to speak. You get the last word in this exchange, and then I want to ask each of you a distinct question on this topic. Go ahead.
So I would suggest that the sense of urgency is why it is imperative that these contracts get done within 6 months. We have paraprofessionals in this Commonwealth who are one paycheck away from being homeless.
And they make around $22,000.
Right around there.
Is that okay?
And at the end of the Woburn action, they are now have the opportunity to earn $43,000 a year.
I got to follow up by asking you, what is sort of a standard salary for a classroom teacher these days? Because paraprofessionals, that isn't a ton of money, especially in Massachusetts. But
And
I know teachers.
I don't have the information on hand, but I can tell you that the paraprofessionals around $22,000. I was in Canton 3 weeks ago, $12.61. I was sharing with Glenn, the lifeguards, the MDC are getting $25 an hour
I
in
know
high school.
you can make more money if you go work at Whole Foods, for example, or
Yeah,
the retail spots.
right.
I want to just shift gears slightly. I'm curious about why each of you thinks this is actually, and I mean, to some extent, you know, we think it's a notable issue. That's why we're talking about it here. But I'm wondering if the fact that these strikes are already happening makes it maybe less of a meaningful issue than I want to hear why, because, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, I had committed the various places that the strikes have happened lately to memory, and now of course they're gone because I'm too old to do that kind of thing. But recently, Melrose, I believe, Haverhill, I think, Woburn, I can't remember one or two other municipalities. So these strikes are going on. They're technically, Malden, thank you. They're technically illegal, but they happen anyway. My sense is that when they're resolved, frequently the teachers union will then pay couple $100,000 to the community where the strike happened. So I'm wondering, and I'll let you get in on it first, why is this even why is legalization a big issue since they're happening anyway?
The public's memory is short, particularly if the strike didn't occur in a town where you live. So it's a news item, and people's memories come and go quickly.
Case in point.
Okay, but the reason that we're concerned is that this is a pattern of steps that the unions have been taking to become more aggressive at the bargaining table, more aggressive in the school, to create a larger impression, and it certainly happened during COVID. We won't go back until we decide that it's safe, to create the impression that somebody else might be in charge. And if they get the right to strike, you'll start to see more of that. And the people who are responsible for overseeing school districts will have to fight harder for their management responsibilities and policy-making responsibilities.
Okay, so you see it as a part of a bigger shift in power that you're not appreciative of.
And I cannot pretend not to understand why a lot of teachers are angry. The regulatory climate for teaching is very, very rancid. It's very hard in Massachusetts. It's a tough job. I don't deny it. So people are angry, and this is one of the ways that anger plays out at the bargaining table.
All right, so why do you think the right to strike is necessary if, in fact, strikes are already happening with some regularity, frequently working out in a way that's beneficial to teachers, and the cost is not that great for the union?
So I would just disagree respectfully. What I'm seeing is that there's a lot of support in the community for these actions because they understand that the educators are standing up and fighting for the learning conditions of our students. And so when we talk about the conditions that we wanted to go into a building within a pandemic, it was because we wanted our students safe and we wanted people in the community to be safe. Woburn last week, I had the opportunity to meet an educator, third generation educator. Her grandmother worked in the cafeteria, her mother was a nurse, and she's now an educator in the Woburn school system. More than half of the educators in Woburn grew up in that town. They are fighting for the schools that they believe their community deserves. And there is a sense of urgency. Right now we have a staffing crisis, we have a salary crisis, and we have a crisis around social and emotional learning with our students. And so 6 months should be more than enough to get the deal done.
I want to introduce a new topic here under the broader heading of education and the Healey administration. And there may be a little more common ground between the two of you when we turn to this. I'm not sure. In that interview with John Keller, Governor Healey was asked by John about whether she'd be up for eliminating the MCAS as a graduation requirement. He framed the question saying teachers' unions would like to do away with this as a requirement statewide, leave it up to local control. And I had the impression watching her response that he was a little surprised by what she had to say. Let's take a look at what she did say.
I think what's important is that we take a hard look at MCAS. I certainly don't dispute or want to do away with an assessment, an ability to assess how well a child is doing, because we want to make sure that we're working with that student to help them advance.
And you also want to see where the bad teachers are.
Well, I think it's important that we have the assessment
or administrators.
Assessment tools in place, and that we are assessing the right things. You know, a lot has changed in education from the time that you and I went to school, and so I am open to looking at what we're actually measuring, what we're actually assessing with MCAS. I think that's important.
So Glenn Koocher, it seems to me like that's an openness to rethinking MCAS or reevaluating it that we did not see in the Baker administration. What's your reaction?
How sweet the sound of one's own words coming from another powerful source. Yes. MCAS is a very, very complicated system of testing, assessment, various other criteria that go into weighing how well kids in schools are doing, and what the state plans to do about it.
Yeah.
It's like the Schleswig-Holstein question. European historians will tell you only 3 people understand it: a professor who died, a teacher who went mad, and Konrad Adenauer, and he forgot. So it's a tough issue to have.
Kind of a black box, right? If you try to figure out how do all these things fit together, people who are intimately rooted in it can't necessarily tell you.
And there are probably 75 to 100 different ways that you can be in favor of MCAS rethinking without making substantive changes to the way MCAS is used. So there's the rhetoric, there's the getting it done, and we embrace the opportunity to have a really thorough, intelligent, rational conversation about whether testing and how it's used and how the assessment system is created in a regulation and punishment climate to be good for kids in schools.
Deb McCarthy, I think I saw you, maybe I'm just looking for, you know, an upbeat storyline here. I think I saw you nodding in agreement when Glenn was saying what he just did.
With his statement that the MCAS system is not doing what it was meant to do, it is the high stakes of the system is harming students. We are ranking and shaming. And the system about assessment, as a 5th grade teacher, I taught for 25 years. I left the classroom for one reason and one reason only. I left a school where 3 of my grandchildren are. We have got to stop the harm, and we have got to let students thrive. We have got to teach to the whole child. The MCAS assessment are provided to educators 6 months after the test is taken. I would get the data from the MCAS when my students were in 6th grade. We have the ability to assess, do performance assessment. We need to stop the harm, and we need to support the Thrive Act legislation that the MTA filed and let students thrive.
Forgive me for my ignorance here. Thrive Act would do what? Just really, we've got about a minute left. I want to let Glenn talk about the Thrive Act.
Really quickly, it would remove the high school diploma competency thing so that students would be able to graduate reflecting a pre-K through 12 experience. It would take away the power to put districts into receivership. It's been a failed experiment.
Right.
It has not had any success, and it would allow us to teach to the whole child.
And I would say that the appointment of Pat Tutwiler as the new Secretary of Education, a breath of fresh air that we've been praying for 25 years, in collaboration with the Commissioner of Education, Jeff Reilly, who I think under the leadership of a different kind of majority could be more flexible on some of this stuff. We are excited about the opportunity of doing some meaningful MCAS reform.
Okay, well, if that gets from on Beacon Hill, you two can come back and talk about it. All right. Glenn
Thank
Koocher,
you.
Deb McCarthy, thank you both.
Yes, thank you.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And please tell us what you think at the addresses below. For now, thanks for watching and good night.
He was a rebel